You don't really need to know anything about French history. Feel what we're about to explore together. A quiet evening settled over the narrow street. The last light faded from the windows. The man who would arrive tomorrow didn't know it yet. He was still on the road, traveling. The countryside grew gradually more built up. His cart moved slowly through the day. The horse was patient and steady. There was no hurry for men like him. Men who worked with their hands. Men who fixed things. Men who moved from place to place. He had received the commission months before. A letter arrived about the work. A building in Paris needed repairs. Regular maintenance work was needed, nothing urgent, nothing grand, just the steady kind of work. The work that keeps buildings from falling. He had accepted the offer. The pay was fair and honest. He had nowhere in particular to be. This was the life of a craftsman. You went where the work was. You stayed as long as you were needed. Then you moved on to the next place. Tonight he sat at a small inn. The room was simple and plain. A bed, a table, a window. The window looked out onto a courtyard. Other travelers rested their horses out there. He could hear the quiet sounds, hooves shifting in the evening air, a voice calling out some orders, the soft noise of people settling. He ate a simple meal that night, bread and cheese and thin wine. The innkeeper asked what brought him to Paris. He explained about the work needed. The innkeeper nodded without much surprise. There was always work in Paris. The city was always changing, always building, always needing repairs, always needing people like him. He slept well that night, the kind of sleep after a day of traveling. Deep and uncomplicated rest came easily. He woke before dawn as usual. The world was still dark outside. He lay in bed for a moment, listening to the sounds of the inn, servants moving in the hallways upstairs, a door opening somewhere close by, someone feeding the fire below him. He rose and dressed himself quietly. He packed his few things away. Everything he owned fit in one bag. This was the life he lived. You didn't accumulate many things. Things were weight. Weight was burden. The journey into Paris took several hours. As the morning progressed, everything changed. Countryside gradually gave way to buildings. First, scattered houses appeared slowly. Then small villages came into view. Then the density began to increase. More structures, more people, more noise. The quality of light changed too. In countryside, the light was open. It was clear and very direct. In the city, it was different. Light bounced off stone and glass. It became something more complex now. It became something much harder to define. He noticed the streets first of all. They were paved with smooth stone. The stones were worn very smooth. Years of feet and carts had worn them. Horses had passed over them countless times. He could read the city's history. He could see it in the wear. Places where many people walked showed grooves. Deeper patterns marked the heavy traffic. Places where carts regularly passed showed marks. Different patterns of wear appeared there. Without fully understanding what he was seeing, he began to see the city differently. He saw it as something living, something with its own rhythms inside, something with its own patterns too. The building where he would work was special. It was located in a better district. The streets here were wider and longer. The buildings stood taller in this place. They were more carefully constructed here. Windows had glass in them inside, not just wooden shutters for closing. The stones were fitted with great care. This wasn't a district for working people, or if they worked for others. They worked for people with money. He understood this without anyone telling him. The woman who opened the door was calm. She was of middle age and wise. She had grey hair that showed. She didn't try to hide the grey. She wore clothes that were fine, but not flashy or bold-looking. Simple, practical, but well-made. Made from cloth that was quite good. She greeted him with quiet courtesy. There was no coldness in her manner. She told him her name then. She told him what repairs were needed. She showed him to his small room. It was clean and very simple. It had a window that looked out. The window faced the building's courtyard. It was more than he expected. Many buildings didn't house their workers inside. He had assumed he'd find lodging elsewhere. But this woman had prepared a space. It suggested she meant him to stay. The work began right away. There were locks that needed fixing, doors that hung unevenly on hinges, windows that didn't close properly anymore. Stones in the courtyard had shifted. They needed to be reset again. The kind of work that never ended. There was always something needing attention. He settled into a rhythm quickly. He woke up very early each day. He worked all through the day. He ate his simple meals in peace. He slept his sound sleep at night. The building itself was worth observing. It was old. Very old indeed. The stonework showed different time periods, different eras of repair and change. Some stones were placed centuries ago, others were more recent in date. He could read the building's history. He could see it in the structure. He saw how foundations were reinforced. He saw how walls had been braced. He saw old sections joined to new. Each repair told its own story. Each one showed past necessity. Each one showed problems that were solved. People faced practical problems back then. They solved them as best they could. The people in the building became familiar. There was a housekeeper who managed. She managed the daily operations smoothly. A groundskeeper who tended the gardens. A cook who worked in kitchens. A young woman as a companion to the older woman. These people worked with great efficiency. They understood their tasks through long years. They didn't speak much to each other, but they were cordial when they met. They understood his role in this place. He was there to do necessary work. That understanding was actually quite enough. The rhythm of the building became clear. There was a pattern to the sounds. Certain times when doors opened and closed, certain times when the courtyard was busy, certain times when it was very quiet. The cook worked early in the morning. The housekeeper moved through rooms at midday. She checked on things, directed younger workers. The groundskeeper worked in the gardens. He worked mostly in the afternoons. The older woman moved less predictably. Sometimes she was in the library, sometimes she was in her private rooms, Sometimes she stood in the courtyard. She stood there looking at something he couldn't quite see clearly. He worked on the locks with care. Locks were actually his specialty in life. His father had been a locksmith. His father before that was too. There was a kind of meditation in it. You had to understand the mechanisms. You had to feel the resistance. You had to move with precision. It wasn't fast work by any means, but it was deeply satisfying when a lock began to work smoothly, when the tumblers aligned perfectly together. It felt like a small victory. One morning, perhaps 2 weeks had passed, he noticed something different in the air. It was subtle in every way, the kind of thing you felt, not something you could really see. The housekeeper moved more quickly than before. The cook seemed more tense somehow. The young companion woman seemed anxious. He didn't ask any questions at all, but he began to notice more. The building received fewer visitors now. Conversations would stop when he came near. People seemed to listen for something, some kind of sound they feared. He continued his work with focus. The locks were his primary goal, but his awareness had grown deeper. He began to understand, without being told, something was wrong or very different. Something was causing genuine concern. To the people living in this place, he didn't know what it really was, but he felt it in how they moved. He heard it in their voices. He sensed the tension underneath, the tension that existed beneath routines. One afternoon, as he worked in the hallway, the older woman passed by him slowly. She paused. She asked him something. She asked how his work was going. He told her it was going well. The locks were functioning much better now. She thanked him for the good work. She asked if he was comfortable in his room with the courtyard view. He said that he was quite comfortable. She nodded at him then. Then she said something that surprised him. She said she was very grateful for his practical work here. In these uncertain times it mattered. It was good to maintain things, to keep practical aspects in order. He didn't fully understand what she meant, but he appreciated her acknowledgement. The words felt genuine and kind. Days continued to pass by slowly. He fell into a deeper rhythm. His hands knew the work completely. His body moved without thinking about it. He began to understand the architecture. He could see previous repairs made. He could see where it had shifted. He could see water damage on stones. He could see the building's design, designed to last very long times. And he began to notice her more. He noticed the woman who owned this place. She moved through the building gracefully. She was never in a hurry. She seemed aware of everything around her. When she spoke to working people, she was always very respectful. She didn't demand. She only asked. She thanked people for their work. Once he saw her in the kitchen. She was helping the cook with something. She wasn't supervising the work at all. She was simply lending her own hands, lending them to work that needed doing. He found himself wondering about her. Who was she really? Where from? What was her particular life story? But he didn't ask these questions. They weren't questions that were his to ask. His role was simply to work, to fix things, to be present, to be competent and quiet always. And so he remained in that role. But his attention had deepened greatly. Without fully understanding his own self, he was becoming quite invested in the woman's well-being, invested in this building's future. The work expanded beyond what he'd started. The housekeeper asked him for more help. She asked if he could repair something, a bedroom drawer that wouldn't open properly. The cook asked him for something, a drawer in the kitchen was stuck. The groundskeeper asked if he could help. A fence was leaning too far. It needed to be reinforced again. The building kept presenting him with tasks. He completed them all with great care. And with each task completed, he became more woven into this place. He became more woven into this life, the daily operations of everything here. One morning he heard different voices, not loud, but with urgency in them. There was a quality of tension. He couldn't hear the words clearly, but he heard the underlying tone. He continued his work steadily on. But he was listening very carefully. He understood something was happening, something separate from normal daily rhythms. Later that day, the housekeeper came. She came to him with a request. She asked if he could work on something, a locked room on the upper floor. The lock was apparently broken there. It hadn't been used in a long time. She gave him a key then. She asked him to be careful. She said the room contained things that were important to the woman, things that were very important indeed. He agreed right away to do it. This was his work, his job. This was what he had trained for. When he opened that locked room, he understood immediately why it was locked. It was filled with so many things. Books. So many books everywhere. More books than he'd ever seen. He'd never seen so many in one place. Paintings hung on all the walls, furniture made with the greatest skill, objects that suggested great education, objects that suggested means, suggested wealth. The room had been sealed up, as if someone had made a decision, the decision that what it contained, what it held, had to be protected, or perhaps needed to be hidden. He worked carefully on the broken lock. He didn't touch anything else in there. But as he worked, his eyes took notes. He saw titles on book spines, French, but also other languages too. He saw paintings that seemed important, paintings that depicted significant scenes. He saw furniture that was clearly old, inherited, passed down through time. The room spoke of a life that had been different once, that had contained learning and beauty, access to things not easily found. When he finished with the broken lock, he locked the room again carefully. He returned the key to the housekeeper. He didn't ask questions at all, but his understanding had deepened greatly. The woman was educated, quite cultivated. She came from a world of books, a world of art and thought, and that world had to be hidden, had to be locked away somewhere. He didn't understand the reason why, but he understood it truly mattered. The atmosphere of the building shifted more. It became more tense, more careful, more quiet than it had been. One day there was a knock, a loud knock at the front door, the kind of knock that meant authority. It meant someone official had arrived. He was working in the courtyard. When he heard that loud knock sound, he heard the door open wide. He heard voices that sounded formal. Then there came a period of silence. He continued his work in the courtyard, but his full attention was focused on what was happening inside. He heard multiple footsteps moving around. He heard the sound of doors opening, doors closing as they moved through. He understood something very significant was happening, that someone official was searching the building. He remained there in the courtyard. He continued his work on things. Time seemed to move quite differently now. Minutes felt much longer than usual. Eventually the footsteps came back down. The voices returned to the hallway. Then the front door opened and closed. The official visitors had finally left. The building returned to complete silence. He saw the woman an hour later. She was standing in the courtyard. She looked exactly the same as always. But there was something that had changed, a weariness that hadn't been there before, as if something had been taken, not taken physically from her body, but something essential had been taken. He wanted to ask if she was well, but he didn't say anything at all. It wasn't really his place to ask. His place was to work, to be there, to be present and steady always. And so he continued his work in silence. The days that followed had changed quality. The woman seemed to move more slowly, as if the search had affected her, not just emotionally but physically too. But she continued her daily routines. She continued to be kind to the people who worked for her. She continued to acknowledge his good work. One evening, as work was finishing, he found the woman in the courtyard. She was sitting alone by herself. She seemed to observe the space, the quality of the fading light, the way the stones held warmth. She looked at him as he came near. She didn't speak to him, but her expression was quite open. It was inviting him to simply be, to be present without much talking. He sat on a bench nearby, not too close, but close enough to be companionable. They sat in silence as light faded. The courtyard began to cool around them. Shadows began to lengthen on the ground. It was a simple moment, but it felt important somehow, as if something subtle had shifted, as if the woman had decided it was acceptable for him to be there, to be present in her grief, not to ask about her pain, not to try to fix anything, simply to be there while she felt. After that evening together in silence, their relationship had changed in subtle ways. It remained professional in every sense, but it had deepened underneath. The woman began to speak to him more, not about personal things in her life, but about the building itself, about its history and how old, about repairs that were made before. She seemed to find comfort in this, in focusing on the practical, on the tangible and the lasting. He suggested improvements to the building, ways to reinforce weak sections, ways to protect it from weather, ways to make it more durable. She listened to these ideas carefully. She asked really quite good questions. Together they began to plan ahead, planning longer-term maintenance together. It was as if together they had decided the building mattered, that keeping it standing was important, that this was important work. More weeks continued to pass by. The work continued without stopping. The atmosphere of the city changed too. He noticed this when he went out, when he walked through the streets, When he encountered other people, there was a kind of watchfulness, a care about what was said, and to whom it was being said. Conversations seemed to stop abruptly when strangers approached them from near. People seemed to be measuring each other, deciding if they could be trusted. He didn't fully understand what was happening, but he could feel it. And he began to realize something. The anxiety inside the building reflected something much larger, something happening beyond these walls, something causing fear in the city. One afternoon, the woman asked him something. She asked if he would come to the locked library room. She wanted to show him something. He followed her up the stairs. She opened the door to that room. The room filled with all those books. She stood in the doorway for a moment, simply looking at all the things. Then she asked him a question. Which books did he think mattered? Which ones were the most important? He was quite surprised by this. He told her he wasn't educated, that he didn't know much about books or learning in general. She smiled at him slightly. She said that education wasn't really required to understand which things actually mattered, that sometimes people who worked with hands understood value in different ways. They spent an hour in that room. She moved through it quite slowly, running her hands along the shelves. She pulled certain books down gently. She looked at certain paintings. She was making actual decisions, deciding what mattered enough to keep, what could be left behind. Over the following days and weeks, she continued this process very slowly. She packed certain things into boxes, books that she wanted to keep, a painting or two, objects meaningful. She didn't ask him for help, but he offered it openly. Together they carefully packed the things. They placed them in a cart that was kept in storage. It became clear, without being stated, that she was planning to leave. One evening she came to him. She asked him if he'd sit. She told him she'd made a decision, that she could not stay in Paris, that the danger was becoming acute, too acute for her to stay, that she needed to leave very soon, that she would travel to countryside, to a region that was more peaceful, where she might live quite quietly. Then she asked something that surprised him. She asked if he would come. She asked if he would go with her. He didn't answer immediately. He understood she was asking. She was asking something significant. She was offering him a choice, that his answer would truly matter. He thought about the building. He thought about the work remaining. He thought about staying in a familiar place, about the safety of what he knew. But he thought also about her strength, her kindness, about the way she moved through her world with grace despite the fear. He thought about his choice, to stay and be safe, or to go into uncertainty, to go with someone he respected. He told her yes. He told her he would go. He told her he would travel with her. She closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, there was something like relief, something like gratitude in her eyes. She thanked him for his loyalty. She said it was quite rare, that she was very grateful. The next days were spent preparing. They arranged for the cart and horse. They made sure they were both ready. They packed what needed packing. They prepared the building for their leaving. They didn't move very quickly. There was no panic in their preparation, only a careful, methodical process of getting ready for what came, of deciding what could be left and what needed to come along. On the last evening at the building, they walked through the rooms together. The housekeeper and groundskeeper understood. The cook knew what was happening. They said quiet goodbyes together. There was sadness in these goodbyes, but also deep understanding. The woman had been good to them. They would miss her greatly. But they understood what she needed. They understood she had to go. They moved through the courtyard one last time. The woman stood and looked at the space where they sat, the space where they had shared, where she had shared her burdens, with him without using words. Then she turned and moved toward the cart. The worker followed along behind her. They were ready for leaving now. They left early in the morning, before the city fully woke up. The streets were quiet and mostly empty. Few people were there to see. The horse pulled the cart steadily forward. The worker drove the cart carefully. The woman sat beside him quietly. They moved through the city slowly, toward the edge of the city. The buildings gradually gave way to countryside all around. The air changed its quality noticeably. The sounds changed, the feeling changed. They were moving away from danger. They were moving toward the unknown. The journey itself wasn't difficult at all. They moved at a steady pace. There was no feeling of being rushed, no sense of being pursued at all. Simply the steady forward movement. The movement of a cart and horse moving through the French countryside. They traveled for several days forward. As they moved farther from Paris, the atmosphere seemed to lighten noticeably. The woman's shoulders began to drop. Her breathing seemed much easier now. The weight she had been carrying, that weight seemed to reduce slowly, to reduce with each passing mile. They found shelter at small inns. The woman paid for rooms quietly. She didn't draw attention to herself. She was simply a woman traveling with a worker alongside her. Nothing remarkable, nothing to notice. They ate their simple meals together. They slept their restful sleeps at night. They continued moving forward again. The countryside was beautiful in ways that peaceful places are. Rolling hills, fields of green growing, small villages scattered across the landscape, forests full of tall trees, rivers that flowed very quietly. The landscape was beautiful to observe, but the woman seemed moved by something else, by something far more important, by the simple fact of distance, by knowing they moved farther away from where danger lived, by the growing sense that they might actually find safety. On the fourth day of travel, they reached a region that felt different. The hills became much smaller. Villages were farther apart from each other. The atmosphere felt genuinely quiet, genuinely peaceful in fundamental ways. They found a cottage there. It was simple and quite plain. It had been empty for some time, but it had a roof and walls. It had a working hearth inside. They could make it livable. The woman negotiated with the owner. She negotiated the rental price carefully. The price was fair and reasonable. There was no need for questions, No need for answers to anything. It was a simple transaction. That first evening in the cottage, they sat by a fire. The worker had built the fire, built it from wood found nearby. The woman held her hands toward warmth. For the first time since leaving, she seemed to relax completely. Her face, which had been tense for so very long, her face seemed to soften noticeably. She spoke quietly about what came next, about building a life right here, about staying in one single place, about the chance to breathe deeply. The work of fixing the cottage began right away without any delay. The roof needed repairs very badly. The hearth needed careful cleaning. Windows needed to be sealed tightly, sealed against the cold air. The worker set about these tasks, set about them with focused care. It was work he had trained for, his whole entire life of work. But now it had different meaning. He wasn't working for someone else's building. He was working to create safety, working to create a true home, a shelter, a place of safety. As he worked on these things, the woman worked beside him closely. She helped wherever she could help. She planted a garden in spring soil. She brought furniture to the cottage. She bartered for pieces that mattered. She created an interior that was modest, but clean and very orderly. She brought out some of the books, brought out the books she had packed. She began to paint again, using materials she had carefully kept. Weeks became months as time passed. The seasons moved forward steadily. Spring deepened into summer weather. The worker's hands, which had grown soft during his time in Paris, his hands became calloused once again. From practical work that needed doing, he repaired many things on the cottage. He built things that were needed. He maintained the cottage regularly. This work felt quite different from the work in Paris. It was clearly necessary work that made real difference, made difference in their daily lives. The woman seemed to grow stronger as the months went forward. The anxiety that had been written into her body so deeply, that anxiety began to ease. She still carried the memories of what she had lost, but she was building something new, a life simpler than before, but a life nonetheless, a life that included beauty, learning and companionship, the companionship of someone she could trust. They developed rhythms and routines together. The worker would work each day. The woman would tend her garden. She would work on her paintings. She would complete practical tasks needed. In the evenings, they would sit together. Sometimes they would talk about things. Sometimes they would simply be present with each other in quiet. Slowly, the fear that had been so present in Paris, that fear began to fade into the distant past. One morning, a messenger arrived. A messenger came to the small town. He came with news from everywhere. He told the news to people. The woman and worker did not go. They did not go to listen. But the news eventually did travel. It traveled through the town slowly. The danger in Paris had ended. The person who had caused the fear had been removed from all power. The immediate threat had finally passed. The woman received this news quietly. She was relieved the danger ended. but she didn't want to go back. Return to Paris where she'd lived. That world was completely gone now. It had been destroyed entirely. Destroyed by what had happened there. She could not go back. Return to what had existed before. She could only move ahead from where she was. And where she was here, in this cottage, in this garden. This quiet life. This man who had become her companion. They had become each other's companion. Through the difficulties of their journey, the seasons continued to turn around them. They lived through a winter together. It was cold, but warm inside. The cottage kept them warm and safe. The next spring came around again. The garden began to grow things. A full year had finally passed. A year since leaving Paris. The worker and the woman, they had become part of the town. People knew them in this place. They didn't need the full story. The woman was from elsewhere. The worker was a skilled craftsman. That understanding was more than enough. 2 years passed. Then 3 years, the urgency and danger. The danger that had defined their leaving. That had defined everything about escape. That urgency seemed increasingly distant. The woman had integrated the memories, integrated loss into her larger life. She spoke sometimes about her past, about the world she had known. But it didn't dominate her thinking. She had built something quite new, something quieter than before, something less grand than her past, but something very real. The worker also was changed by the journey they had taken. He had learned from the woman about the complexity of the world, about how to hold multiple truths at the same time, how good intentions can produce difficult outcomes. The importance of choosing kindness in the face of complexity. He had come to the building, a skilled worker focused on his craft, but he had left it changed as a man understanding something deeper about how to live. One evening they sat in the garden. They sat as the sun was setting. This was something they did regularly. They would sit and watch the light gradually change, watch colors shift from gold to orange to purple to blue and beyond. Watch the world move from day into the quiet of night. It was their favorite time, the time when work was completed, when nothing was left to do but observe, be present, exist together in the quiet. The woman spoke about the revolution, not with bitterness or anger, but with clear understanding. She said the revolution intended beauty. It intended to change how people thought about power and rights, the relationship between ruler and ruled. It intended to create something better. But the path was complicated, filled with difficulty and loss and suffering unforeseen. The revolution's architects hadn't anticipated all the suffering that would come. She told him she didn't blame the revolution exactly, but she also couldn't excuse what it had done. She held both truths together, the beauty of what was intended, the pain of what occurred, the ideas that had survived and the warning it had left. The warning about how quickly How quickly idealism becomes destructive when combined with certainty and fear. The worker listened to her words. He was learning through her, learning how to think about complexity, how to acknowledge good intentions and harmful outcomes at once, how to move ahead without pretending the past never happened, how to build something new, while remembering what was lost. Another year had passed. Then, another year after that, the cottage had become established, very much established in the landscape. The garden had become productive, producing food and flowers. The woman's paintings accumulating on the walls of the home. The worker continued his work, but now much of his work was for the town. He had developed a reputation as a skilled craftsman. People brought him things to repair. People asked him to work on their own buildings. He became known, became trusted, became part of the community fabric. The woman and the worker, they had an understanding together, an understanding without speaking. They lived together in this place. They worked together as partners. They had become essential to each other's survival, but they also maintained boundaries. They respected each other's privacy. They gave each other space. This arrangement seemed to work. It seemed to be quite enough. One afternoon, as they worked in the garden together, the woman paused for a moment. She looked at the worker. She asked him if he was happy. It was a direct question, the kind that requires real answers. He thought about the question. He thought about the life they built, about safety, about work, about companionship that was real. He told her yes. He told her he was quite happy, not in a way that erased the difficulty they had lived through, but in a way that acknowledged that they had survived it, that they had built something worth actually having, that life was genuinely good, even if it was quieter, even if it was less grand than the woman's life before. The woman smiled at him then. She said she was happy too, that she had lost so much, but she had also gained the knowledge she could survive, that she could endure difficulty and continue forward anyway, that there were people like him, people who would stand beside her, that there was still beauty. Beauty still existed in the world, even after everything bad. As the light faded that evening, they sat on a bench, they sat there in the garden, they didn't speak to each other. There was nothing more to say. They had told each other the essential things that mattered. Now they could simply exist together in peace, could watch the world change color, could breathe together gently, could feel the peace that comes from knowing you are safe, you're not alone, that the worst is behind you. The evening deepened into night. The stars began to appearing in the darkening sky. The sounds of the day diminished. The insects began their evening songs. The air cooled slightly. The world slowed down. And the world grew quiet, the woman and the worker. They remained in the garden. They remained until it was dark. until there was nothing to see except the stars above them. Then they rose up slowly. They moved inside the cottage. The fire in the hearth was warm. They added wood to it. The light of the flames filled the small room with warmth. The woman sat with a book. The worker worked on something, worked on a repair, a task, something practical, something necessary. They were very quiet now, the kind of quiet that happens when two people have lived through something significant, together in shared difficulty, and have come to understand each other very deeply. The kind of quiet where words are actually unnecessary, because presence is enough, more than enough, everything. As the fire burned lower, they prepared for sleep, prepared as they always did. Simple preparations, practical routines, the routines of people who have learned to live in harmony together, in harmony with the physical world. Before sleeping, the woman stood at the window, looked out toward the garden. Though she could not see it now in the dark, she thought about the building in Paris, the woman who lived there before the journey, before the escape. It felt like a different person, a different life, a different world, something that happened to someone else. And yet she knew it had shaped her. She knew she wouldn't be who she is without living through all of that. The suffering had transformed her, but it had not destroyed her. She had survived, she had built something new. That was enough. That was everything. The worker fell asleep before the woman did, the kind of deep, uncomplicated sleep that comes when a person has done real work and feels safe. The woman lay beside him. She thought about the journey, their journey together as partners, a journey that had begun with a simple transaction, a worker coming to fix a building, and it became much larger than either of them. A shared survival, a shared rebuilding, a shared life together now. She thought about the choices that had led them to this moment, the choice she had made to leave the city, the choice the worker had made to accompany her, the choices they had made each day to continue, to work, to build, to be kind to each other, even in the face of difficulty. These choices had created the life they lived, created the peace around them, created the safety that allowed them to sleep without any fear. As she drifted towards sleep, the woman felt gratitude that was deep and very quiet. Not gratitude for the suffering, but gratitude for having survived, for having found someone to travel with, for having been able to build something new, for the fact they were here in this cottage, in this small town, in this life that was theirs. The night deepened around them, the fire in the hearth. The fire burned lower, burned down to embers. Outside, the world was quiet. The garden was at rest. The town was sleeping. In the distance, Paris continued its turbulent transformation. But here, in this cottage, in this simple place, there was peace, there was calm, and the gentle sound of two people breathing together. There was the warmth of a fire that was slowly fading. There was the knowledge that tomorrow would come again, and with it more work, more routines to follow, more moments of quiet companionship. And that was enough. That was more than enough in a world that had proven how quickly everything could change, how quickly danger could arise, how quickly a life could be turned upside down. The simple fact of having enough, of having safety, of having someone beside you, of having work that mattered, of having a home. This was everything. As sleep took the woman, her last thoughts were of tomorrow, of the work in the garden, of the repairs still needed, of the quiet routines, the routines that made up the texture of days, of the meals they'd share, of the moments of stillness, the moments when they'd sit together and watch the world move through its changes, of the life they'd built together from loss, from fear and difficult choices, a life that was genuinely good against all odds. The moon was rising now, though neither was awake to see it. Its light fell on the cottage, fell on the garden beyond, fell on the small town sleeping around them. The moon had risen and set thousands of times. Before this night arrived, it would rise and set thousands of times. After this moment passed, the worker and woman, they were simply two people living their lives within the vast turning of days and seasons, of years, two people who had found each other in the midst of historical turbulence, who had chosen to continue, who had built something real and lasting in the larger world history. History continued its arc forward. The revolution had transformed France. The ideas it had planted had traveled beyond France's own borders. The warnings it had left behind were being ignored, and then learned, then ignored again by generations who would come after. But in this small cottage, in this small town, there was simply a man and a woman, and there was peace and enough, more than enough. The night was complete now. The darkness was total, complete and very total. The stars shone overhead, indifferent to human history, indifferent to suffering and survival, indifferent to choices made. They simply shone, simply existed as the worker and woman. The woman simply existed, simply breathed gently, slept deeply at rest in the safety they had found and built together. And in that rest, in that quiet, in that peace, a kind of ending. An ending had been reached, not an ending suggesting nothing more would happen. Life would continue, seasons would turn, work would need doing. Routines would persist and continue, but an ending to the fear, an ending to the urgency, an ending to the feeling of being pursued. What remained was simply life. Simply the ordinary beauty of existing from one day to the next. Simply being together, simply being alive. The cottage was quiet, the garden was quiet, the town was quiet, and within that quiet existed everything that truly mattered, everything that had driven them to this moment, everything that had made this peace possible, everything that would sustain them as they moved forward into tomorrow and the days beyond. All of it contained in this single night, in this single moment, in this single cottage, where a man and a woman slept peacefully, where fear had been traded for safety, where loss had been integrated into a life that continued, that still continued forward, where the past, though remembered, no longer defined the present. The world turned, the night deepened, and in the turning and deepening of the night, there was the promise that tomorrow would come, that life would continue, that the work would remain, that peace once found could be held, that this moment, this place, this life was real and lasting, was enough, was everything. Sleep deeply now, the story is complete, the journey is finished. The woman and the worker have found their peace, and you listening, you are here now, safe, warm, present, in your own bed, in your own moment, in your own time. The history they lived through is past. The fear has passed. What remains is the gentle turning of nights, the quiet persistence of life, the knowledge that difficult times can be survived. That beauty can be built from loss. That peace, though it must be chosen and maintained with care, is possible. Close your eyes, let yourself drift. The story has taken you as far as you need. The rest is sleep, the rest is the natural unfolding of rest. The rest is yours.